A trip to the Belanglo State Forest began as a 17th birthday celebration with friends.
He's walking down singing and he was just so happy, and that's the last time I've seen him.
But what happened during the course of that evening was nothing short of horrifying.
The incredible capacity for evil of people who were so young, I think, is what made this case so chilling.
But tragically, this was not the first time the Belanglo State Forest had been associated with evil.
Nobody could believe that another generation of Milats were involved in these kind of killings.
The senseless murder of David Auchterlonie in the Belanglo State Forest was a crime that shook Australia.
When I met Chase Day, I was in the Milat Barrel police station. He was pretty tired and still upset at the circumstances.
Mr. Day, for the purpose of the record, would you please state your full name and spell your surname?
Chase Nathaniel Day, D-A-Y.
Now, it's been explained to you that you're under arrest for your involvement in the murder of David Auchterlonie. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Chase Day told the police that he had gone to Belanglo State Forest with two friends and that he had witnessed a murder.
And I said, "What are you doing this for?" And he said, "You stay the fuck out of it and get back in the car." And I did what he said because I didn't want to get hit. And I heard Octo start screaming.
The chilling statement by a regular 18-year-old in the early hours of Monday the 22nd of November 2010 confirmed that something terrible had happened in the nearby Belanglo State Forest. Chase Day had handed himself into the police and revealed that his friend, 17-year-old David Auchterlonie, had been murdered. In 2010, David Auchterlonie was just a normal teenager, growing up in the small town of Bargo, New South Wales.
He liked to ride his scooter and his skateboard. His motorbikes and push bikes, play PlayStation, just have fun.
Although close to his mother, David grew up in the family home of his grandparents.
When he was little, he was a beautiful baby. He was no trouble whatsoever. And when he first of all came to me, he came for a short stay, and as his parents went different ways, his stay with me grew longer.
He was just happy and loved life and enjoyed it, and it was just good to be around and to have someone like that in your life.
Everybody was his friend, everyone was his friend. And he never seen the bad in anyone.
Yeah, David was very trusting with a lot of people and would give them a chance and, hang out with them and see what sort of people they were and hope that they didn't do wrong by him.
David Auchterlonie belonged to a close-knit group of local teenagers who used to hang around in Bargo. The group included Chase Day, Cohen Klein, and another young man who stood out from the others.
When David was up at his mother's place one day, David said to me, "Nan," he said, "you remember Matt?" And he came right up to my face and he said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "You're Matt Muleman." He said, "I am not." He said, "My name's Matthew Milat."
Matthew was in fact born Matthew Muleman, and at some stage he had changed his name. That Matthew had started to develop this fixation with Ivan Milat, who was his great uncle.
A man has appeared in court charged with the backpacker serial murders. 49-year-old Ivan Milat faces 7 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder.
Ivan Milat is one of Australia's most notorious serial killers. He was convicted of murder in 1996 after abducting, torturing and killing 7 backpackers before hiding their bodies in the Belanglo State Forest.
Ivan Milat picked up all of his victims, the police think, around about the same place on the Hume Highway. He stabbed them in the back to paralyse them so they couldn't run away. One of the German backpackers, Anja Habschied, she was beheaded. He used others for target practice, and there was evidence that some of them were sexually assaulted as well, including some of the male backpackers. And then he buried them just next to a log in the Belanglo State Forest. And the police don't think that these 7 backpackers that he killed were the only ones. They continued their investigations, and there are at least another dozen women who went missing, believed murdered, whose bodies have never been found.
Rather than shying away from his relative's chilling history, Matthew Milat almost idolised his uncle Ivan and would actually brag about his connection.
Matthew Milat started to talk to his friends about how he thought of Ivan Milat, that he would often want to go to Belanglo State Forest to have a look at the plaques and the sites relevant to the backpacker murders. And that really put people off Matthew Milat, really started to send out warning signals about his mindset, his frame of mind.
He certainly seemed to take an incredible perverse pride in that link. A lot of other Milat family members had changed their name to avoid the association, but here we had someone who was absolutely hell-bent on being associated with this family and with this crime.
And I said to David, I'm sorry, but I don't like him. I said, there's something weird about him. And I said, do you realise that he's related to Ivan Milat, the one that murdered the backpackers? He goes, oh yeah, Nan, but he said, you never ever see the good in people. You always got to see the bad. I said, well, I'm just telling you to be very, very careful him, because there's just something about him.
I think David, because he was just that sort of person, he just felt sorry for him, you know, felt bad, had what the family had gone through.
David's family were well aware of Ivan Milat's crimes. They'd always regarded his great-nephew Matthew Milat as a little odd, but soon his behaviour began to raise much more serious concerns.
And one day, Matt Milat had pushed David, and I've come out and I said, what's going on out here? And I said to David, I said, you go inside. And I said to Matt Milat, you get in your car and you go home. And he came right up to my face and he said, nobody tells me what to do. And I was frightened, so I put my hands out and I've literally pushed him off me. And I said, now you get in your car and don't you ever come back here again. He then began doing drive-bys past my house 2 or 3 times a day, and he'd come up here around the corner, skid on the brakes, and the car would do a 360. He was a bully. He was a definite bully.
Despite his grandmother's dislike for Milat, David continued to spend time with him. It was an association that would cost her grandson dearly. On Saturday the 20th of November 2010, David Auchterlonie was celebrating his 17th birthday with his family, first with his mother and then with his grandparents.
Being his birthday, we, talked and hung out for a little while, give him a card with some money in it. And then he went off to his nan's to do the same thing and celebrate his birthday there with them as well.
And my younger son came down and we had a birthday cake and we sang, and he loved it and he was so happy.
And we had a couple of beers and he said he was going with his mate. He said, well, look after yourself, don't do anything silly. And that was the last we seen of him.
David's plan was to meet up with 3 friends, Chase Day, Cohen Klein and Matthew Milat, to continue his birthday celebrations.
When David left me, to the best of my knowledge, he was going down the street. He was always down the street. He would be sitting under the tree, there'd be a group of young boys with him. They'd sit there and just laugh and just look at all the girls because they were at that age. And there was no reason for me to think otherwise.
However, David never made it to his usual hangout. Matthew Milat had other plans in mind. He wanted to go to the Belanglo State Forest.
He used to boast to people, you know what my uncle is famous for, you know what my family is famous for, and that in the lead up to the crime, he had been talking to friends and boasting that, well, we're going to go to Belanglo and someone's going to die.
Belanglo State Forest is a dense pine woodland of around 4,000 hectares. It lies about a 40-minute drive from the town of Bargo in New South Wales. Since the early 1990s, it's become synonymous with murder.
The Belanglo State Forest is probably one of the most notorious sites in Australia. I've spoken to a lot of people who've been there. It's just an eerie place to be by virtue of what everyone knows or believes has happened there.
Belanglo Forest is a really eerie place. It's dark, it's dank, it's got the high trees. If you didn't know the area, you wouldn't know where you were. If someone put you in the middle of the forest, you would never be able to find your way out.
Matthew Milat was for some time asking for people to come with him to go and visit the sites that were notorious now as a result of his uncle.
On his 17th birthday, and after a day celebrating with his relatives in Bargo, David Auchterlonie planned to meet up with friends to continue the celebrations.
Chase Day met up with David early that day. Matthew and Cohen came and picked them up. They went and got some drugs, and then they went to the Belanglo State Forest. And the idea was that they were going to go down the forest, smoke some cones, have some drinks, and basically celebrate as young boys do without fear of police or anyone getting involved and ruining their party. They got something to eat and then stopped at a little Y intersection in the pitch dark and sat there and they played some music.
And David Auchterlonie had sort of gone along with this plan of just 4 friends hanging out in the forest. At this stage, still none the wiser as to what was going to take place.
I hadn't heard from David for 2 nights, and I thought, this is highly unusual. David definitely rings me, whether he's stranded, hungry or what.
On Sunday I tried to ring him. I couldn't get through. So on the Monday I tried again and I again couldn't get through.
The mystery surrounding David's disappearance would be solved that same day.
When I met Chase Day, I was in the Mooram at Barrel Police Station. He was a young man who witnessed something very traumatic, but at the same time he'd implicated himself in the offence. He had confided in his father earlier that day and his father immediately took him to the police.
Tell me what happened starting on the 20th of November.
Chase Day told us that for some reason Matthew Milat called David Auchterlonie from the front of the car up around to the boot, and he suddenly heard David cry out or scream.
Cohen come over to me and he said, just get in the car, and I heard Auchto start screaming because Matt hit him in the ribs with an axe.
And then he saw Matthew Milat with an axe chasing David Auchterlonie around the car.
And he said, lay down. And Matt, Auchto was like, don't do this, man, like crying, saying he was sorry.
There wasn't a lot of light down there apart from the headlights, So he says that he didn't physically see much of the assault at all. Mostly just the verbal exchange that he could hear.
But I could hear Auchto like crying and screaming, telling Matthew to stop. And then he laid Auchto on the ground, and all I heard was Matt saying, move your hands, and then I didn't hear anything hit Auchto, but he just went silent.
It's at that point that he says that Matthew Milat starts talking about taking the body and having to dispose of the body.
He dragged Auchto along. He dragged him along the ground.
Did Matthew say to you why he wanted David dragged into the bush?
So he wouldn't get found.
One thing I do remember quite clearly from the interview with Chase Day is his recollection of Matthew Milat's behaviour on the way back to Bargo. And he describes Matthew Milat going through this rush, like a high.
Oh, he was saying...
What did they actually say?
Matt was saying, oh yeah, that was such an adrenaline rush. That was all I heard him say. And then Cohen was like, I told you that you were going to go down the same path as your uncle, and that was it. And then I started losing it.
Just hours after Chase Day gave his statement, David Auchterlonie's body was discovered by police, where it had been hidden in the Belanglo State Forest. Shortly afterwards, his relatives were told of his death.
And then I got a knock on the door, and there's an officer from the Goulburn police station. He said, oh, there's been an accident. And they said, now we want you to go down and identify the body. So we've gone down, and they've said to us, can I stop?
I rang his grandparents' phone number, and his uncle actually answered, and I said, hello, is David there? I've been trying to ring him and I just can't seem to get through. And his uncle just turned around and said to me, no, Donna is not with us anymore.
And we went down to Bowral to identify the body.
That was horrible because all I could see, it was his eyes were wide open, and they were just staring. Just help me. That's all I remember seeing.
I think I was still in shock at the time. I think I held it together till the funeral. Yeah, that's...
They wouldn't let me touch him or hold his hand or kiss him or say goodbye because they didn't want me to interfere with the evidence. And even though I said, yeah, but it's me, like, I'm his mum, I had to stand back and say goodbye to him and tell him that I loved him and that I was sorry. And
Chase Day implicated both Cohen Klein and Matthew Milat in the death of their friend, David Auchterlonie. Police moved quickly to arrest the two suspects.
Now that we'd established what had occurred by speaking to Chase Day at Bowral, the next phase of the investigation moved to the arrest of Matthew Milat and Cohen Klein. When the police arrived at Matthew Milat's house, they found him asleep in his bedroom. When he told him that he was under arrest and what the police were investigating, his reaction was very nonchalant. Enjoying the notoriety was my interpretation.
Now, Matthew, do you agree with me that I entered your bedroom and I said that you're under arrest?
Yes.
Okay. And I also spoke to you about a hat that you were wearing on Saturday night. And what did you indicate Tell me about that, sitting in the bedroom. And also some shoes that you were wearing. The shoes that just either white Ravens.
They located a pair of shoes, which we later found had the blood of David Auchterlonie on them, and also a hat, which we believed Matthew may have been wearing at the time that he committed the murder. Matthew Milat was taken back to Camden Police Station by Andrew Marks and another investigator, Greg Payne, and they attempted to interview him there about his involvement.
For the purpose of this record, what is your full name?
Matthew Stephen Milat.
What stood out to the investigators during the interview with Matthew Milat was how calm he was. There was very, very little reaction, considering that he was a 17-year-old boy who was under arrest for a horrific murder.
I'm investigating the murder of David Auchterlonie, who was killed on Saturday, the 20th of November 2010 at the Belanglo State Forest. Do you understand that?
Yes.
He was supported by his grandfather, William Milat, and he was quite protective of Matthew.
Where were the clothes that you were wearing on Saturday night?
Just don't answer that, Matt.
Okay. So the interview with Matthew Milat, unfortunately, didn't give us any further evidence. It was basically a no-comment interview.
Now, I want to ask you some questions about that. Are you prepared to answer those questions?
No.
At the same time, other detectives went to the home of Cohen Klein.
Just for the purpose of the video recording, can you please tell me your full name?
William Cohen.
Police conducted a search warrant at the address of Cohen Klein. He identified a number of items which belonged to him.
But whose shoes are those?
They're my brother's shoes.
Where are your shoes?
Just they're my new shoes.
When you say new shoes, how long have you had those for?
2 days.
Of interest, the investigators located a Nokia mobile phone that Cohen Klein had identified as being his phone.
Who owns that mobile phone?
Me.
Is that the only mobile phone you have?
Yeah.
We wouldn't realise the significance of that phone until later on in the investigation.
Want to handcuff you?
So you understand?
Klein was taken to a local police station where he gave his version of events.
Police station. You'll be entered into custody.
Cohen Klein played a different tact when he was arrested by police. He immediately tried to play victim. He told the police that he was absolutely petrified of Matthew Milat, that he'd been caught up in a horrific murder, and that he was too scared to come forward.
At any stage did you attempt to stop what Matt was doing to David?
I couldn't, but if Chase was asking him to stop and he just kept saying, "Shut the fuck up, Chase," sort of thing.
When did that conversation take place?
When I was going around the car.
Okay.
I was literally like scared for my life. I couldn't say anything to Matt, like, or I just get the shakes thinking about Saturday night. Can't even sleep or nothing.
Okay.
We didn't accept any of it. Jace has told us that as you got in the car, you basically ushered him into the car as you're telling me, and it's about that time that you've said to him, "I've asked Matt not to hurt you. I told him that you're my mate, or I'm your mate." Yeah. Words to that effect. Do you recall?
That was
how he said that.
When did he say that? No. Why would I say that? He said it to me like after I said it to him, after I seen Matt.
Is there any reason why you didn't ask him to not hurt David?
Well, I couldn't really ask him because it was a bit late.
The inconsistencies in Cohen Klein's statement were enough for police. They were convinced that amongst their three suspects was the killer or killers.
Initially, I did have some suspicion that Chase Day may have had some involvement, and the reason being is his version started with him telling us that he'd had concerns earlier that day that Matthew Milat was going to kill David Auchterlonie, and he couldn't really explain that.
When you met up with Matthew and Cohen that afternoon before you went to the forest, did you think that they were going to kill David?
It was on the back of my mind, but then when we got in the car...
Why was that in the back of your mind?
Because Belanglo Forest, and then Matt being Ivan's nephew.
For that reason, I wasn't completely convinced that Chase Day's version was true.
Despite these doubts, Day's statement, along with a lack of any other viable suspects, convinced police that they had found the people responsible for David's death.
Cohen Klein was charged with murder. Chase Day was charged with accessory after the fact to murder for his involvement in disposing of the body. And Matthew Milat was charged with murder, and all of them were bail refused.
Matthew, you're going to be charged with the murder of David Auchterlonie. Do you understand that?
Yes.
This interview is now concluded.
With the 3 suspects in custody, but 2 very different versions of events, police had to decide if Chase Day was telling the truth. Was he an innocent victim or a willing accomplice? They would find the answer to that question on the phone discovered at Cohen Klein's home.
Even though the file had actually been deleted, the electronic evidence branch were able to actually recover that file piece by piece, and I could tell straight away what I was listening to. It was the recording of the murder.
Detectives investigating the brutal murder of David Auchterlonie in the Belanglo State Forest had discovered a mobile phone at the home of one of the suspects, Cohen Klein.
We're going to take that mobile phone that the Cohen's identified as his.
What they found on that phone was the evidence police needed to convict their suspects.
We interviewed Cohen Klein at Goulburn upon advice from his solicitor prior to the recording being found. And at that stage, we were hopeful that we would actually recover the file, so we put it to him at the time.
Where was your mobile phone that night? Did you have it with you?
Yeah, it's in the pocket.
Did you, at any time, make an audio or a video recording from your mobile phone? No. You're in possession of your phone at all times that night, were you?
Yeah.
Okay.
He reacted as though he didn't know what we're talking about.
The recording would prove to be the vital piece of evidence in the case. Over 14 minutes, the final horrifying moments of David Auchterlonie's life were played out. Due to its graphic nature, the recording has never been made public.
When the recording starts, you do see a brief glimpse of video of David Auchterlonie leaning into the driver's seat of the car, preparing a joint, and the boys are talking about the fact that he's not doing a really good job of it. Shortly after that, you hear this groan, and you hear David Auchterlonie. It's like a sound as though he's been winded, and we know from the examination at the post-mortem that Matthew Milat struck David Auchterlonie in the ribs with a large axe.
What was Matthew saying, if anything?
Stop running. Well, I want to talk to you.
David Auchterlonie has fallen to the ground. You hear Matthew Milat basically proceeds to taunt him for minutes. It goes on. And Chase Day is begging for David to be left alone, wanting to intervene.
And I said, what are you doing this for? And he said, you stay the fuck out of it and get back in the car. And I did what he said because I didn't want to get hit. And I wanted to be there for Day, but there was absolutely nothing I could do.
Towards the end, Matthew Milat starts to repeat himself, building up to the final blow.
So he was just asking him the same question over and over again. And how can I trust your word? and all that, and they was like, you can, and he's like, well, from all this other shit, how can I trust it? And that was it. That's all I heard, and I just said, they just went silent.
Hearing David's last breath, and it's very chilling sound.
Several months after the murder, police were handed another vital piece of evidence.
A person had been walking down around the ponds in the Bargo area and found the wallet of David Auchterlonie with the licence still inside. With the proximity of the wallet to a local swimming hole, we sent the police divers down, and not long after they recovered the large double-headed axe that Matthew Milat had used to kill David Auchterlonie.
This terrifying weapon, along with the forensic evidence found at Matthew Milat's home, built a solid case against the three alleged perpetrators. At the same time, police were growing more and more convinced that Chase Day's account of that terrible night was, in fact, the truth. In September 2011, the charges against Day were dropped, and he was called to give evidence in court.
We spoke with the Director of Public Prosecutions about Chase Day. It was clear from that recording from the mobile phone that he was under duress at the time. So Chase Day had the charges withdrawn, and at the time of the sentence hearing, he appeared as a witness and assisted the prosecution in providing evidence against Cohen, Klein and Matthew Milat.
In the face of overwhelming evidence against them, Matthew Milat and Cohen Klein both pleaded guilty to murder. On the 21st of May in 2012, the two young men appeared at the Sydney Supreme Court for sentencing.
Matthew Milat had boasted about killing David Auchterlonie before and after it happened. This was his day of reckoning.
It was very strange to be back in the Supreme Court in Sydney involving a Milat. I think that bizarre feeling never really left it, of this horrible sort of family dynasty that had been created in Matthew Milat's mind. To have that played out in court, to have the Belanglo State Forest, all of these words coming back into courtrooms in Sydney so many years after the trials for the backpacker serial killings, was an incredibly surreal experience.
So the public reaction to this case was one of horror and outrage because of the age of the victim, because of the age of Matthew himself when this was committed, the use of the battle axe, and I think just the horrendous nature of what happened.
Richard First was asked to undertake a psychological examination of Matthew Milat. This was submitted as evidence at the sentence hearing.
I concluded that he was likely stressed by some of the situations he'd raised, including the relationship and unemployment and some drug use. However, there was no indication that he was driven by a serious mental illness or psychosis, and even the reasons he gave were probably insufficient to account for the horrendous nature of what actually took place and the degree of planning.
I used to look at Matthew in the dock, but he was cold, you know. He knew he was going to get what he was going to get, and he wasn't going to feel sorry or guilty. He's just that sort of person.
He would not engage with the courtroom. Kept his head down. He didn't look at the judge, he didn't look at the gallery, didn't look at us. It was unusual.
Every time he looked at Milat, there was no remorse, and it was like, hey, I'm on show here. I can't be touched.
They were just sorry that they got caught and jailed and they got locked up. Other than that, I believe that they would have been still out bragging about it to this day.
On the 8th of June 2012, Justice Jane Matthews sentenced the two young men for the murder of David Auchterlonie.
It was clear to the court that this offence was a premeditated murder, that there was no real motive apart from Matthew Milat wanting to kill David Auchterlonie essentially as a thrill kill and to emulate his Uncle Ivan.
Although the judge allowed Cohen Klein a small reduction in his sentence, Matthew Milat was refused any leniency due to the extreme gravity of the crime and the serious danger he posed to the public.
Justice Matthews handed down one of the most significant sentences for a juvenile that I'm aware of, and is definitely, as the legislation stands at the moment, one of the most significant sentences handed down to a juvenile, and that was 43 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 30 years.
Probably the thing that speaks loudest, that it was such a horrific crime that it seemed to attract such a long sentence. But I was still surprised at how long that was, because most juveniles are given a chance to rehabilitate or engage and tend to have shorter sentences. So it's very uncommon to have such a long sentence.
The reaction of Matthew Milat and Cohen Klein when they were sentenced was one of shock. I think it was probably finally dawning on them just how much of their lives they will now spend in jail.
We were glad that they got as long as they did, but we still don't think it was enough. You know, they took a life. They should have got life. They should have been put in jail, locked up for the rest of their lives, never to be released.
Although disappointed by the sentence, David's family hoped that the closing of the court proceedings would allow them to grieve in peace. But Matthew Milat had other ideas. During the sentencing, David's family were given a note written by Matthew Milat.
Matthew Milat prepared a single-page handwritten letter of apology to the Auchterlonie family, detailing his regret for what had happened that night. But it was a letter that was wholeheartedly rejected by the Auchterlonie family, who saw it as nothing more than a ploy by him to avoid a heavier sentence.
Although the note was dismissed by the Auchterlonie family, who saw it as completely lacking in remorse, this was not the first time Matthew Milat had written about David's death. Matthew Milat and Cohen Klein had been convicted of the murder of David Auchterlonie and given significant prison sentences. As David's family were left to grieve in peace, Milat's own writings in custody began to reveal more about the mind of a killer.
A poem that Matthew Milat wrote about 9 months after the murder was actually described by the sentencing judge as being particularly chilling. To think that a teenager was capable of writing such brutal violence, and the images that were raised in the poem were really incredibly haunting. This was a poem written by Matthew Milat called Your Last Day. Click clack, hear that, stopping in the middle of the track. Are you getting nervous in the back? Should be you're getting whacked. Talk shit here, talk shit there. No one's really gonna care. But talk shit with every breath. You just signed away your health. I can see you start to sweat, wondering what you're gonna get, hoping for one in the head. Or put it in your leg. Tell me, are you having fun? Get up and start to run. How far are you gonna get? Your match you have just met. Stumbling all over the place. Hear the crunch of leaves and feet. Feel your heart skip a beat. Are you gonna get away? No hope, kid, this is your day. The day that you won't be found 6 feet underneath the ground.
It really, in my view, speaks to the person who is in a way glorifying, if you like, the events or reliving them. It's a deeply worrying sign that there's a poem like that written.
In July 2013, the friends and family of David Auchterlonie were even more incensed when his killers appealed their sentences.
I was quite disgusted to know that they were trying to appeal their sentence because they thought they were hard done by. They weren't the ones hard done by, David was. You know, so why should they be given a chance to appeal their sentence and to reduce it so they can get out and have their freedom when my son didn't get a chance?
When they appealed, I just felt sick in the stomach to think, here we go again, haven't we been through enough? We're suffering, we've got this life sentence and we have to sit now and watch you two showing no remorse because you didn't give two hoots about David.
Matthew Milat's appeal was dismissed, but Cohen Klein had 2 years taken off his minimum jail term. And David's friends and family now have to live with the knowledge that one day these two men may be released.
I hope they never get out because Milat is a sick psychopath and I believe that he would have scores to settle. And for those people that came forward and helped solve all this mystery, he would be after them, they would be targeted.
Matthew Milat tried to follow in the footsteps of Ivan Milat, his great-uncle. 2 sets of crimes committed in this beautiful forest. But we're left with the question of why he did it. Was this a matter of nature or nurture?
The reasons behind personality formation and violence are not fully understood, but there have been studies showing a linkage between various genes in the brain and persistent juvenile offending.
Certainly Matthew Milat seemed to hint that he saw that he was fulfilling some sort of family destiny by boasting about, you know what my family is famous for and you know what my uncle did there. But it is hard to imagine that someone did this to make a relative who he barely knew proud. I think this was just a case of two very bad young men who did it for nothing more than seemingly their own entertainment. And I think that's what makes this case just so incomprehensible.
In the aftermath of this terrible tragedy, the Auchterlonie family continue to honour David's memory.
He was well liked and there's still people that remember him. Sandra and I had a plaque put on the local skate spot. He spent a lot of time up there, chilling out, riding his skateboard or his scooter.
David's death, it rocked the community. It was horrific, and everywhere we went, people were crying and we'd have people coming up to us. It just brought us into the spotlight and we didn't want that.
David's death had a big impact on the community. It just broke a lot of people. It devastated us all.
I think what we can learn from sometimes friends that appear to be friends just definitely aren't your friends, and just to be wary.
Every now and then you do something and he comes flooding back because you may have done it with him. It's little things that you've done with him that bring you unstuck.
I still can't accept it, and I've just had to learn to live with it every day and just accept the reality of it, that it's happened and that he's gone. It's absolutely devastated me and destroyed me, and when they took David's life, they also took mine. Yeah.
The thing that always strikes me about this case in particular, having worked at homicide for a number of years, is that this was a thrill kill. For me, it's hard to rationalise an offence where a young man, a 17-year-old boy, murders another 17-year-old boy for fun.
This is certainly one of the absolute worst crimes that I have ever heard of. The violence, the callousness, the youth of the two people involved, Matthew Milat and Cohen Klein. I think it absolutely was a case that shook Sydney, shook that area near Belanglo again, and obviously because of the notorious Milat name, certainly shook Australia as well.
The information that we had from our investigation into Matthew Milat was that he was going to kill again. He definitely had the intention to go on to be like his Uncle Ivan and to gain that notoriety by killing as many people as he could. He really wanted to go on to become a serial killer.